The denial. The morning air in Mountain View was calm, almost too calm as Sundar Pichai stepped out of the modest black car that had brought him to Google headquarters. He had chosen not to use the official CEO vehicle that day. No security escorts, no assistants walking beside him. He wore a plain shirt, slightly faded jeans, and sneakers that had clearly been worn many times before. He looked less like the chief executive officer of one of the world's largest companies and more like an ordinary man who had just stopped by to ask for directions. The decision was intentional. Sundar had always believed that a person's value was never in their clothes or in their wealth, but in their heart and their humility. He wanted to see for just one day what it felt like to walk into his own company without the weight of his title. As he walked toward the massive glass, building that symbolized innovation and progress to the entire world, he couldn't help but smile softly. The morning sun bounced off the polished windows, making them glow with an almost blinding brightness. This was the empire he had helped build, brick by brick, idea by idea. Yet today, he wanted to test something far more human than technology. He wanted to see if kindness and respect still lived inside the walls of his company, or if power and arrogance had taken over. But the moment he reached the main gate, his quiet test took an unexpected turn. Standing tall and stern at the security checkpoint was a new guard, someone Sundar had never seen before. The guard, young and rigid in posture, scanned Sundar from head to toe. There was no recognition in his eyes, only suspicion. "Stop right there," the guard said firmly, extending his hand as Sundar tried to walk past. "This area is for employees and authorized personnel only. Do you have an ID badge?" Sundar, calm as always, reached into his pocket. He had purposely left his company-issued badge at home. He wanted to see if his presence, his face, his name meant anything without that small piece of plastic. He looked at the guard and shook his head gently. "I don't have my badge with me," he said in his soft, unassuming voice. "But I work here. My name is Sundar." The guard narrowed his eyes, unimpressed. "Sundar?" he repeated, almost mocking. "That doesn't mean anything. Do you know how many people come here and claim they work for Google? You need proper identification." A few employees began walking past, scanning their badges on the electronic gates. Some glanced at Sundar, curious about why he was stopped. Others didn't bother to look at all, too caught up in their morning rush of meetings, deadlines, and caffeine-fueled thoughts. Sundar stood there quietly, his calmness almost unsettling against the guard's growing impatience. "Listen, sir," the guard continued, his tone sharp now. "You can't stand here pretending you belong. If you don't have a badge, you need to leave. This is private property." Inside, Sundar felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of him admired the guard's seriousness toward his duty, but another part of him wondered how easily people dismissed others just by appearance. Was his worth invisible without the title of CEO? Was kindness conditional on status? "I do belong here," Sundar replied softly, his eyes steady. "You may not recognize me, but I assure you I am part of this company." The guard gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Everyone says that. Do you expect me to just let you in because you say so?" "Sir, please don't make this harder. I don't want to call the police, but I will if you refuse to leave." The words hit harder than Sundar expected. Call the police? On him? In front of the very building where he had spent years, building dreams not just for himself, but for millions of employees and billions of users around the world. Still, he didn't let anger or pride show on his face. Instead, he stood with the quiet dignity that had carried him through every trial in his life. From the small streets of Chennai where he grew up, to the biggest boardrooms of Silicon Valley. Just then, two young engineers walked past, chatting loudly about a project deadline. They glanced at Sundar, paused for a moment, and whispered something to each other. One of them smirked, shaking his head. "Probably another job seeker trying to sneak in," he muttered, just loud enough for Sundar to hear. The other chuckled, and they both walked away without another word. Sundar's heart tightened slightly. Not from shame, but from the realization of how quickly people judged without knowing. Here he was, the CEO of Google, being mistaken for a nobody, laughed at by employees who worked under his leadership. Yet, in that moment, he felt no urge to correct them. He simply wondered, What does this say about the culture I've built? The guard, noticing Sundar hadn't moved, took a step closer. Sir, this is my final warning. If you don't leave immediately, I will call the police. Do you understand? A heavy silence followed. Sundar didn't move. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, his calm eyes fixed on the massive Google logo above the glass entrance. Behind that logo were thousands of people who knew his name, who respected his position. Yet out here, stripped of identity, he was just another man. At the gates, the silence broke when the guard reached for his walkie-talkie. Control, this is checkpoint 1, he said firmly. I've got a suspicious individual refusing to leave, requesting assistance. As the words echoed in the air, more employees slowed down, curious about the scene. A few even pulled out their phones, recording videos, assuming they were capturing another case of someone trying to trespass at a famous company's headquarters. Sundar stood there, unshaken, his mind racing back to his younger days. He remembered standing outside offices in India, waiting for interviews, nervous that no one would take him seriously. He remembered how invisible he had felt then, how small. Now, decades later, life had brought him full circle, to a moment where he felt just as invisible, just as small in front of the very company he led. The guard's voice grew louder, demanding backup. Sundar looked around at the curious faces, the cameras, the whispers. Part of him wanted to end it all right there, to pull out his phone, make one call, and watch the guard's face turn pale as the truth came crashing down. But another part of him, the stronger part, wanted to wait, wanted to see how far this would go, wanted to see who, if anyone, would stand up and recognize not his face but his dignity. And as he made that decision, as the guard's call for police went through, Sundar took a deep breath. He had walked into this day to test his company's heart, but he hadn't expected the test to begin so harshly, so quickly. And then, in that tense moment, just before the police were about to arrive, someone's voice rang out from behind the crowd. Wait. I think I know who that man is. The humiliation. The crowd at the Google entrance grew larger, employees whispering and pointing as they watched the strange scene unfold. Sundar stood silently at the gate, his calm presence clashing with the tension that hung in the air. The guard held his walkie-talkie close, his hand tight around it, ready to call the police. But then a voice had cut through the noise, firm yet hesitant, saying, "Wait, I think I know who that man is." Everyone turned toward the source of the voice. It was an older janitor, a man with tired eyes and a back bent slightly from years of labor. His gray uniform looked worn, and his shoes carried the scuff marks of endless walking through the long corridors of the building. He stepped closer, squinting at Sundar as if trying to confirm a memory from long ago. "Isn't that?" the janitor began, his voice uncertain. But before he could finish, the guard cut him off. "Don't get involved," the guard snapped. "This is company security business. If this man has no ID, he's not allowed in. End of story." The janitor hesitated. He recognized the face. He had once seen Sundar during a Thanksgiving dinner organized for staff. Sundar had gone out of his way to shake hands with even the janitors to thank them for their work. The memory lingered, but doubt clouded his mind. Would the CEO really stand here in plain clothes, denied entry like a common trespasser? What if he was wrong? If he defended the wrong man, it might cost him his job. And so, with fear outweighing courage, the janitor stepped back into the crowd, lowering his eyes, pretending he hadn't spoken at all. A sharp pain cut through Sundar's chest at that moment, not from anger at the janitor, but from sadness. He understood the hesitation. He had lived his life knowing how fear silenced good people. Still, seeing the man retreat reminded him of how easily respect was replaced by self-preservation. The guard straightened, looking satisfied. "Control, send a patrol car immediately," he said into his device. Possible intruder refusing to leave. The words hung heavy. Sundar remained still, his hands relaxed by his side, though inside him a storm of thoughts raged. He thought of his childhood, of standing in long queues at ration shops in India where officials treated the poor like shadows. He had once promised himself that if he ever held power, He would make sure no one under his leadership felt invisible. And yet, here he was, invisible in front of his own people. Minutes later, the faint sound of police sirens carried through the streets. The employees whispered louder now, some smirking, others curious. Phones captured every angle, eager for drama. "Can you believe this?" one young programmer muttered. "A trespasser at Google HQ, security really caught one today." Another replied, "He looks so calm though, like he doesn't even care." But someone else scoffed, "Nah, he probably doesn't even understand what's happening. Just another desperate guy trying to sneak in." The judgment was harsh, cutting through Sundar more than he expected. But instead of anger, he felt a strange clarity. He realized this moment wasn't just about him. It was about them. About the culture that had grown inside his company. About how quick people were to dismiss, to mock, to belittle. The police car pulled up to the entrance, its lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern. The crowd parted, making way as the guard waved them over. "That's him," the guard said firmly, pointing to Sundar. "He's been refusing to leave. Says he works here but won't provide ID." One officer approached, hand resting on his belt. "Sir, may we see some identification?" he asked politely but firmly. Sundar shook his head slowly. "I don't have it with me." "And what's your business here?" the officer continued. "I work here," Sundar answered. His voice was steady, without a trace of defensiveness. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You work here? In what capacity?" The crowd chuckled quietly, as if waiting for Sundar to embarrass himself. A few whispered bets on what excuse he would give. Sundar looked at the officer, his eyes calm, his words deliberate. "I am the CEO of this company." The silence that followed was deafening, then quickly broken by a wave of laughter. Some employees nearly doubled over, unable to contain themselves. "Did he just say CEO?" one of them mocked. "Yeah, right, and I'm the President of the United States," another added. Even the guard smirked, shaking his head at what he thought was a ridiculous lie. The officers, however, didn't laugh. They had seen strange things before: eccentric geniuses, confused individuals, imposters. They couldn't dismiss it outright, but without proof they had to follow procedure. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us," the officer said firmly. "We can sort this out at the station. If you really are who you say you are, it will be cleared quickly." Sundar nodded gently, showing no resistance. "Of course," he replied. He could have ended it there with a phone call, with one command that would bring the entire building to a halt. But something inside him told him to let it continue, to let this test unfold naturally. As the officers guided him away, Sundar noticed faces in the crowd. Some were filled with amusement, others with indifference, and only a very few with quiet discomfort. He could see who enjoyed another man's humiliation and who secretly questioned the fairness of it. Inside the police car, Sundar sat quietly, looking out the window as the building grew smaller in the distance. He thought of all the values he had tried to instill in his leadership: empathy, kindness, humility. But now, stripped of his title and power, he had seen how fragile those values became when people forgot who they were dealing with. And yet, instead of despair, a new idea began to form in his mind. Perhaps this was not an accident. Perhaps this was the perfect chance to look into the soul of his company without the mask of authority. As the car drove further, Sundar whispered softly to himself, "Maybe it's time they see who they really are when they don't see who I am." And while he sat in silence back at the Google office, the video of him being denied entry spread online like wildfire. Headlines popped up on blogs and social feeds. "Man claims to be CEO of Google, gets escorted by police." Some mocked the man in the video. Others debated his strange calmness, and a few, very few, wondered if there was something more to the story. But inside the company walls, laughter echoed louder than questions. A group of senior executives walked past the lobby where the commotion had just happened, chuckling at the absurdity of it all. Imagine someone actually thinking they could pass as Sundar Pichai. One of them laughed. Another replied, "People will do anything for attention." Pathetic. What they didn't know was that the real Sundar, The man they had just mocked was about to return in a way none of them could predict. The test begins. The police car rolled through the quiet streets, its sirens now off, leaving only the low hum of the engine. Sundar sat in the back seat, his hands resting calmly on his knees. To any passerby, he looked like a man resigned to his fate, a trespasser caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But inside his mind, a storm of thoughts brewed. The humiliation he had just faced was still fresh. The laughter, the disbelief, the guard's sharp words echoing like cracks in the air. Yet beneath that sting lay a strange sense of clarity. He had wanted to test the heart of his company, and life had given him the perfect opportunity. As he stared out the window, the buzz of his phone in his pocket caught his attention. The officers hadn't bothered to check it. After all, he had not resisted. Carefully, he glanced at the screen. A message glowed across it. "I know who you are. Don't worry. This is only the beginning." His breath slowed, his mind sharpening. Who could it be? Someone inside the company who had recognized him but stayed silent, or an outsider who had been watching. Either way, it meant he was not completely invisible. Someone was paying attention. The officers pulled into the station, guiding him out with formal but not aggressive gestures. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. He was led to a simple desk where an officer began filling out paperwork. "Name?" the officer asked, not looking up from the form. "Sundar Pichai," Sundar answered calmly. The officer smirked faintly, scribbling something down. "Occupation?" "Chief Executive Officer of Google," Sundar said softly, his voice steady without a hint of sarcasm. This time the officer chuckled, shaking his head. "You people. Always the same stories." He slid the form aside and looked at him directly. "Sir, listen. I don't know why you're pretending, but it's better to tell us the truth. We can help you if you're lost or if you need food, or whatever the case is. But lying doesn't help." Sundar didn't argue. He simply smiled faintly, as if holding on to a secret too heavy for words. He wasn't here to defend himself, not yet. This was about observation, about patience. After some time, another officer came over, whispering something into his colleague's ear. The second officer glanced at Sundar, then shook his head dismissively. "Let's just process him and let him go. He's harmless." An hour later, Sundar was released without charges. He stepped out of the station into the sunlight, breathing deeply. He had walked in as a CEO, denied, mocked, and escorted away, and walked out as a free man, still anonymous, still unrecognized. And that anonymity gave him a gift, the chance to walk among his employees unseen. He made a decision then. He wouldn't return to the office as the CEO just yet. He would return as the stranger they thought he was. He would blend in, observe, listen, and learn. He would see the company through the eyes of the invisible. That afternoon, he walked back, toward the headquarters. But instead of heading to the main gate, he lingered near the bus stop where young interns often gathered. He watched as groups of them huddled together, nervous about interviews or first days, clutching laptops and resumes like shields. One boy in particular caught his attention. He was standing alone, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at his cracked phone screen, mumbling to himself. Sundar approached gently. "First day?" he asked softly. The boy jumped slightly, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm supposed to have an interview, but I don't think I belong here. I mean, look at me. Everyone else is so confident. I feel like they'll laugh at me the moment I walk in." Sundar's heart softened. The boy's words echoed his own thoughts. From decades ago, when he had first set foot into interviews, unsure, nervous, invisible, he placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "They won't laugh," he said kindly. "And even if they do, remember this. Your value isn't in how others see you. It's in what you bring, in your effort, in your heart." The boy looked at him curiously. "You talk like you've been through this before." Sundar smiled. Faintly. "I have." Before the boy could ask more, a group of interns walked by, snickering at Sundar's plain clothes. "Hey kid, don't waste time talking to random strangers, focus on your interview." They laughed as they walked past. The boy's face flushed with embarrassment, but Sundar stayed calm. "Remember what I said," Sundar told him gently. "Don't let their judgment decide your worth." As the boy nodded, Sundar walked away, blending into the crowd. His mind replayed the scene over and over. The laughter at the gate, the whispers in the crowd, the mockery at the bus stop. It was all the same story, written in different places. People judged by appearance, not by truth. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Sundar found himself sitting quietly on a bench near the campus cafe. From a distance, he could see groups of employees leaving work, laughing, chatting, rushing to catch rides. He noticed patterns: who greeted the janitors and who ignored them, who held the door for others and who let it slam shut, who smiled at strangers and who rolled their eyes. And in those small, everyday moments, Sundar saw the real culture of his company more clearly than any report or survey could reveal. His phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. "You're beginning to see it now, but there's more. Watch closely tomorrow." Sundar's fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to reply, to ask who it was. But he stopped himself. Instead, he simply stared at the words, his mind racing. Whoever this was, they were guiding him deeper into his own test. And something told him this was only the surface of what he would uncover. As the night settled, Sundar walked away from the glowing campus lights, his plain shoes crunching softly on the gravel. He felt invisible, yes, but also freer than ever. He was no longer Sundar the CEO. He was Sundar the observer, Sundar the listener, Sundar the man who would rediscover his company from the outside in. But little did he know, the next morning, his quiet test would collide with something darker, something that would shake not just him, but the very foundation of the company he had built. Truth hidden in plain sight. The following morning, the atmosphere at Google headquarters was anything but ordinary. Inside the glass towers, whispers rippled through the hallways like a current. Employees scrolled through their emails, their faces tightening with unease as a leaked chain began spreading across inboxes. The subject line was harmless enough: "Incident at the main gate." But what lay inside was far from routine. The email recounted in mocking detail how a strange man had claimed to be Sundar Pichai and was stopped by security before being escorted away by police. One manager had even written, "Good job to the new guard. Imagine if that man had gotten inside. He might have wandered around embarrassing himself further." Most readers laughed or dismissed it, but then came the line buried deeper in the Yawam chain, one that froze the blood of those who actually paid attention. "We can't let him inside. If he gets in, he'll find out the truth." To most, it looked like a careless joke and exaggeration, but to Sundar, who read it later that day on a borrowed device, it was a signal. Someone, somewhere, was hiding something. And his test, which had begun as a search for kindness, was now pulling him toward a darker discovery. That morning, Sundar dressed just as plainly as before. No designer suit, no crisp collar, just a simple shirt and worn sneakers. He moved quietly, slipping into the campus not through the guarded main gate, but through the side where delivery trucks and cafeteria workers entered. No one looked twice at him there. He blended in with the unnoticed. He spent hours observing, wandering through spaces that executives rarely saw. The underground kitchens where cooks hurried to prepare meals, the long service corridors where janitors hauled supplies, the dim storage rooms stacked with forgotten equipment. Here, respect was scarce, but labor was heavy. He noticed how certain employees treated the staff with warmth, offering thank yous, even small smiles that carried genuine respect. But just as often, he saw the opposite. Workers ignored, orders barked, kindness replaced by arrogance. At one point, Sundar lingered near a back hallway where two janitors were quietly mopping the floor. Down the corridor, a group of young engineers approached, laughing loudly. Without slowing, one of them kicked over a bucket of water, sending it spilling across the tiles. "Oops," he said with a smirk, barely glancing at the janitors. His friends chuckled, not stopping to help. The janitors exchanged tired looks, bending down silently to clean the mess again. Sundar's chest tightened at the sight. He wanted to step forward, to reveal himself, to demand better from those who carried his company's badge. But he held back. This was what he needed to see. Not the polished image presented to him as CEO, but the raw truth. Yet amid the disappointment, he also saw hope. Later that day in another corridor, he watched as a young female engineer stopped to help a cafeteria worker struggling with a heavy cart. She pushed it with him all the way to the kitchen, smiling warmly as though it were the most natural thing in the world. No one else noticed, but Sundar did, and in that moment his heart softened again. Kindness wasn't dead. It was simply hidden, waiting for the right eyes to find it. But the deeper he moved through these hidden spaces, the clearer the patterns became. Certain employees thrived on power, building walls of arrogance around themselves. Others, the quiet ones, carried the weight of the company with dignity but little recognition. By midday, Sundar slipped into an empty conference room where discarded papers had been left behind. Curiosity led him to sift through them, and there, he found something that made his pulse quicken. A printed memo partially crumpled with lines underlined in red. It spoke of budget cuts, restructured departments, and, most alarming, an unexplained transfer of funds to a project that didn't officially exist. At the bottom of the page were the initials of two senior executives he knew well, men who had walked past him laughing only the day before. His mind raced. Was this the truth the email had hinted at? A shadow project hidden under layers of bureaucracy, one that they feared he might uncover if he walked the halls freely? As he tucked the memo back into the stack, the door creaked open. Sundar froze. Two employees entered, mid-conversation, not noticing him at first. "We have to make sure no one talks about the transfer," one of them whispered urgently. "If the CEO finds out, we're finished." The other laughed nervously. "Don't worry. The only way he'd find out is if he were wandering around in plain clothes, and we both know that would never happen." They both chuckled, grabbing what they needed before walking out again, leaving Sundar standing in silence, his jaw tight, his breath steady but heavy. Their words echoed in his head. The only way he'd find out is if he were wandering around in plain clothes, he realized. Then that his disguise, his invisibility, was not just revealing the company's culture, it was exposing secrets they thought were safe from him. That evening, as the offices emptied and the building quieted, Sundar sat alone in the cafeteria, staring at the reflection of the Google logo in the glass wall. All day he had seen arrogance, cruelty, but also flickers of kindness. And now he held in his mind the first threads of a hidden betrayal. His phone buzzed again with another anonymous message. "You're close. Tomorrow, watch the board. They're meeting without you." Sundar's hand tightened around the phone. The test he had started was no longer just about humility or kindness. It was about survival, of his values, of his leadership, and perhaps of the company itself. The reveal builds the next morning arrived heavy with unease. The sun rose over Mountain View with its usual golden glow, but inside Sundar Pichai's chest there was no warmth. His steps were quiet, steady, almost rehearsed, as he walked toward the building that once felt like a second home but now carried the weight of suspicion. He knew something was being hidden, something his own executives thought they could bury beneath layers of polished presentations and hollow words. The anonymous message from the night before echoed in his mind. "Watch the board. They're meeting without you." Sundar had always been the one to call those meetings, the one to set the agenda, the one to make sure every voice was heard. The idea that his board, the very heart of the company's governance, was gathering, secretly, without him, cut deeper than the humiliation he had faced at the gate. Betrayal wasn't just in the laughter of strangers now. It was in the walls of the very leadership he trusted. He dressed again in plain clothes, the uniform of invisibility, and slipped into the campus the same way he had the day before, through the service entrance. No one stopped him there, no one even looked at him twice. He was a shadow moving through the spaces that most executives never bothered to see. By mid-morning, the executive board members began gathering in one of the high-glass conference rooms overlooking the main campus courtyard. Sundar stood just outside, half hidden by a column, watching through the transparent wall. One by one, the most powerful figures in the company took their seats, their voices low but tense. Inside, he could see Rajiv, the CFO, flipping through thick folders of financial documents. Beside him sat Margaret, the head of operations, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if weighing who was an ally and who was a threat. There were others too, men and women whose decisions shaped billions of lives every day, but today none of them had bothered to call him. As Sundar pressed closer to the glass, straining to catch fragments of their voices, his heart pounded with a rhythm that was both fear and fury. "The transfer has already gone through," Rajiv said firmly, his tone clipped. "If we move fast enough, no one outside this room will ever know." Margaret leaned forward, her voice colder. "And what about the CEO? He'll notice the gaps eventually. He's not blind." A pause followed, heavy enough to make Sundar's stomach tighten. Then Rajiv chuckled. "The CEO is too distracted with external projects. Besides, he trusts us too much. He'll sign anything if it's dressed up as innovation." Their laughter rang out, low and cruel. Sundar's hands curled into fists in his pockets. He thought of the memo he had found, of the janitors humiliated, of the engineers who mocked strangers at the gate. Arrogance wasn't just a cultural disease. It was spreading into the very decisions at the top. Just then, the door to the conference room opened slightly, and a young assistant slipped in, carrying more files. Sundar caught the sound of her whisper. "There's a rumor he was at the gate yesterday. Some say it was really him." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Nonsense," she hissed. "If he were at the gate, he would have come straight here. No, whoever that was, it wasn't him. Don't let paranoia distract us." Sundar's breath caught. Even when the truth brushed against them, they chose denial. He stepped back from the glass before anyone noticed him and slipped down the corridor. He needed time to think, to breathe. Every step he took felt heavier, weighed down by the knowledge that betrayal wasn't whispered in shadows anymore. It was signed in documents, sealed in budgets, and laughed about in boardrooms. Later that afternoon, he wandered to the cafeteria, blending again among the unnoticed. He sat with the staff, listening as they shared quiet stories of struggle. One man spoke of his daughter needing surgery they could barely afford. Another woman admitted she often skipped meals so her children could eat better at home. They laughed, through their pain, leaning on each other in ways executives never would. As Sundar listened, something inside him shifted. The power of the company wasn't in the polished suits upstairs. It was in these ordinary people who showed up every day, carrying burdens no one in the boardroom cared to understand. Moved, he reached into his pocket and placed a folded note on the table. "For your daughter," he whispered to the man, his eyes warm but firm. Before the man could protest, Sundar had already stood up and walked away, disappearing back into the hum of the cafeteria. Word of his gesture spread quietly among the staff. Some called him a kind stranger. Others wondered if he was more than he appeared. No one guessed the truth, but for the first time, Sundar felt the test wasn't just about exposing arrogance. It was about honoring kindness where it lived. As the day drew to a close, he returned to the quiet of his borrowed apartment, his mind heavy. He knew he couldn't remain invisible much longer. The hidden project, the betrayal in the board, the quiet suffering of employees. It was all building to something he could no longer ignore. His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message appeared. "Tomorrow is the moment. The board will lock you out officially. Be ready." Sundar stared at the screen, the weight of the words sinking deep. Tomorrow his own company would turn against him openly. Tomorrow, he would no longer be just a CEO in plain clothes testing humility. Tomorrow, he would be forced to stand at the center of it all, revealed, unmasked, and ready to fight for the soul of the company he had built. The shocking reveal. The air inside the Google boardroom was tense, almost suffocating. Blinds were half-drawn, muting the morning light, and the heavy glass table seemed colder than usual as the executives settled into their seats. Papers rustled, laptops flickered, awake, and whispers passed around the room like secrets carried on invisible strings. On the agenda at the top of the document projected onto the screen was a line that made Sundar's chest tighten when he saw it through the glass wall from the hallway. Vote on leadership restructuring. Those words were polished, corporate, sanitized, but everyone in the room knew what they truly meant. Removing Sundar Pichai from the very position he had worked his whole life to achieve. Rajiv, the CFO, cleared his throat and leaned forward, his voice sharp but controlled. Colleagues, we cannot delay any longer. There are gaps in oversight, distractions at the top, and we risk losing our grip if we don't act decisively. The company needs stronger leadership. It's time we move forward without Sundar. There were nods around the table, though not all were confident. Margaret, the head of operations, chimed in. He's brilliant, yes, but brilliance isn't enough anymore. He's spread too thin, too trusting. Sometimes leadership requires less humility and more control. Their words sliced through Sundar's heart. Humility, what he considered a strength, was being twisted into a weakness. He had always believed in leading with empathy, in lifting others, in listening before speaking. But now those very values were being weaponized against him. Hidden in the hallway, Sundar took a slow breath. He had seen enough. For days he had walked invisible, watched arrogance flourish, witnessed cruelty and indifference, but also glimpsed kindness in its purest forms. He had tested his company's soul, and now, standing outside the boardroom where his fate was being decided, he knew it was time. He pushed open the door. The sound was soft but carried like thunder through the room. Heads turned, eyes widened, and silence fell. There he stood, no polished suit, no entourage, no badge. Just a man in plain clothes, calm but unshakable, the weight of quiet truth in his eyes. Continue, Sundar said softly, his voice steady but powerful. Don't let me interrupt. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rajiv's face drained of color. Margaret's jaw tightened and several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. What is this? Who let you in here? Sundar stepped closer, each footfall echoing across the cold floor. I let myself in, he replied, and I didn't need a badge to remind me of who I am. But I think some of you need reminding. He pulled out the crumpled memo he had found days before, placing it on the table. The paper landed with a sharp sound that seemed louder than any voice. Budget transfers, he said calmly. Hidden projects, whispered lies, and all of it under the assumption that I would never notice, that I was too humble, too trusting. You laughed at me when I stood outside my own company's gate. You called me invisible. But let me tell you this, humility does not mean blindness, kindness does not mean weakness, and trust is not a permission slip for betrayal. The room was frozen. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. Sundar's voice deepened, carrying a rare intensity that few had ever heard from him. I stood at that gate as a stranger, denied by my own people. I was mocked, laughed at, dismissed. And in that humiliation, I saw the truth. I saw how quickly respect fades when titles are stripped away. But I also saw the quiet strength of the unnoticed, the janitors, the cafeteria staff, the interns. I saw kindness alive where no one was watching. They reminded me why we built this company in the first place. Not for power, not for arrogance, but for people. He let the silence stretch, watching their faces pale with realization. Then he leaned forward, his eyes locking on each board member in turn. You want to vote me out? Fine. But understand this, you're not voting against me. You're voting against the very values that built this place. And when you tear those down, no amount of money or power will save what's left. The words cut through the room like fire through dry grass. Several members shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing across their expressions. Rajiv tried to speak, his voice trembling slightly. We didn't mean... You did. Sundar interrupted, his tone calm but final. And now, every person in this company will know who stood for greed and who stood for dignity. He straightened, his presence towering, though he wore nothing but simple clothes. Those who showed kindness will rise. Those who showed arrogance will fall. And to those who tried to hide the truth, know this. I see you now, and so will the world. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then slowly, one of the younger board members spoke up, her voice clear though her hands trembled. He's right. We've forgotten who we are. Others shifted, some nodding reluctantly, some staring at the table in shame. The balance of the room was shifting, and they all knew it. But Sundar didn't wait for their approval. He didn't need it. He had already won, not through power but through truth. He turned and walked out, leaving them in the silence of their own guilt. Outside the boardroom, whispers spread like wildfire, word of the CEO who had been denied at the gate, who had walked among them unseen, who had uncovered betrayal, and who had revealed himself in the moment of judgment. It all moved through the halls faster than any email. Janitors whispered about the kind stranger who had left money for a daughter's surgery. Interns recalled the man who told them not to let mockery define their worth. Cafeteria workers remembered the stranger who sat with them, listened to their struggles, and treated them as equals. And as the truth dawned, so did respect. Deeper than before, rooted not in his title, but in his humanity. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the glass towers glowed in the fading light, Sundar stood quietly outside the building. The same gate where he had been denied entry now stood open. The same logo that had once mocked him now seemed to shine with renewed meaning. He whispered softly to himself, words only the wind could carry. Power means nothing if it isn't built on respect, and respect means nothing if it isn't given to all. And with that, he walked back inside, not as the man mocked at the gate, not even as to